It eats up ammunition.
The average life expectancy of a German machine gunner on the Eastern Front, once his position was spotted, was measured in minutes. Not because the MG-42 was weak, because it was the opposite. It fired so fast, up to 20 rounds a second, that Soviet mortar crews learned to walk their shells onto that sound before the gunner had even finished his first belt. Every rifleman around him knew the same brutal math. Kill the gunner, and you just erased an entire squad's firepower in one shot. So when a 19-year-old was handed this weapon and told to hold a position at all costs, it wasn't an honor, it was a countdown. They called it Hitler's Buzzsaw. American and Soviet soldiers alike said you could tell it apart from every other gun on the battlefield by sound alone, a ripping, tearing noise instead of the rhythmic bark of a rifle, because it cycled somewhere between 1,200 and 1,800 rounds a minute, depending on the bolt fitted that week. That is nearly twice the rate of fire of anything the Allies carried. A 3-second burst could put 20 rounds into a man before his brain had processed that he was under fire. It chewed through a 7.92mm belt so fast that gunners had to count in their heads just to know when the barrel was about to melt. And on the Eastern Front, that speed became a curse as often as a gift. Picture the crew. 3 men, sometimes 4. Crewman number 1 is the gunner, a junior NCO armed with nothing but a pistol because both his hands belong to the gun. Crewman number 2 kneels beside him, feeding the belt, watching for jams, ready to swap barrels with an asbestos glove in under 10 seconds if the drill goes right. Crewman number 3 is somewhere behind, dragging spare barrels, ammunition boxes, and whatever else the position needs, because a machine gun position that runs dry is a machine gun position that's about to be overrun. Together they are, according to accounts from veterans of the front, the single most valuable target in any German defensive line. Not the officer, not the tank, the gun. Josef Allerberger understood that within his first days in combat. He was an Austrian conscript, trained as a machine gunner and shipped to the Eastern Front in 1943 at 19 years old. He later wrote that he did the math almost immediately and figured his odds of seeing 20 were slim. Machine gun nests were the first thing Soviet artillery observers looked for, the first thing snipers stalked, the first thing a mortar team zeroed in on the moment the gun opened up. Allerberger survived by an accident of circumstance. He got wounded, picked up a captured Soviet sniper rifle out of boredom during recovery, turned out to be terrifyingly good with it, and was reassigned before his gunner's luck ran out. Most men behind the MG-42 never got that second chance. Training didn't prepare most of them for what came next either. In garrison, machine gun school taught the technical side well. Strip the weapon blindfolded, change a barrel in under 10 seconds, calculate range cards, coordinate fields of fire with the platoon on either side. What it couldn't teach was the sound of your own gun answered by 3 Soviet mortars finding the range in under a minute, or the particular silence that falls over a squad after the barrel change goes wrong and the gun goes quiet at the exact moment the enemy line is 50 meters out and closing. Veterans who survived multiple rotations at the front said the technical drills became reflex fast. The part that never became reflex was watching replacements arrive, fresh from that same training, and knowing which of them the Soviets would target first. Here's what the position actually demanded. You dig in, usually in pairs of foxholes, connected by a shallow trench, because a static gun that isn't dug in is a gun that's already dead. You camouflage the muzzle flash as best you can, though at night there's no hiding a burst of that rate of fire. It lights up the tree line like a strobe and tells every observer within a mile exactly where you are. You fire in short, disciplined bursts, 4 to 6 rounds, not because Hollywood says so, but because the barrel glows dull red after roughly 150 rounds of sustained fire, and a cooked-off round in an overheated chamber can kill the gunner himself. You watch your ammunition like a miser watches gold, because a 50-round drum empties in under 2 seconds on full cyclic rate, and out on the steppe, resupply might be an hour away, or might never come. Take a single defensive stand as an example, the kind that repeated itself hundreds of times across the front between 1943 and 1944, with the names and villages barely mattering anymore. A gun crew digs in on a low rise overlooking open farmland, the kind of terrain the MG-42 was built for, flat and treeless for 600 meters in every direction. Dawn brings the first indication. Not a visible line of troops, but a change in the artillery pattern. Softer rounds, walking closer, registering the German position before the real barrage starts. The gunner has maybe 90 seconds between the ranging shots and the assault line breaking cover. He uses them checking the belt, confirming the loader's drum is seated, running his eyes down the tripod's traverse to make sure nothing shifted overnight in the frost. Then the line comes. Not a scattered rush, but a disciplined advance, sections leapfrogging forward while others provide covering fire. Because by this stage of the war, Soviet infantry tactics had caught up hard with German firepower. The gun opens up at 400 meters, well inside its effective range, and for the first 10 or 15 seconds, it does exactly what it was designed to do. Men fall in 2s and 3s. The advance stalls, restarts, stalls again. But the enemy knows where the muzzle flash is now, and somewhere behind that broken line, a mortar team that has been walking rounds toward the position since dawn finally gets a fix. The gunner hears the shift in incoming fire before he sees it. A flatter, closer whistle. And that's the signal to either displace to the alternate position, dug 30 meters back, or stay and keep the gun firing long enough for the platoon to hold. Both choices get gunners killed. Only one of them also holds the line. Winter made all of it worse. Temperatures on parts of the Eastern Front dropped low enough to freeze standard lubricating oil solid inside the receiver, seizing the action on a weapon whose entire reputation depended on cycling fast. Crews reportedly resorted to using diesel fuel, or, when nothing else was available, urinating on frozen bolts, just to free them enough to fire one more burst. Mud did the opposite kind of damage, working into the open action and grinding the mechanism down mid-battle. The MG-42 was engineered to be more tolerant of both than its predecessor, the MG-34. And it mostly was. But mostly wasn't good enough when your life depended on every single trigger pull actually firing. Ammunition itself could turn against you in the cold. Steel cartridge cases contracted at low temperatures and sometimes stuck in a chamber that had contracted at a slightly different rate, jamming a weapon whose entire tactical value was rate of fire. Grease used on the working parts had to be stripped down and replaced with a lighter, low-temperature lubricant, a fix that took weeks for supply chains stretched 1,000 miles from Germany to actually deliver in useful quantities. Until then, crews improvised. And improvising with a machine gun on a battlefield where the enemy outnumbered you meant living with equipment failure as a constant background risk, the same way a man learns to live with weather. The psychological weight sat on top of all of it. Studies of combat stress from both world wars found that sustained, high-intensity, direct-fire roles, machine gunners especially, produced some of the highest rates of what was then called battle fatigue in any branch of infantry service. It made sense. A rifleman fired at targets he sometimes never clearly saw. A machine gunner watched, through iron sights, exactly what a sustained burst did to a man at 200 meters, over and over, for as long as the position held. There was no distance to hide behind. The job put you closer to the killing, not further from it, and the men who did it longest carried that closeness home with them, assuming they made it home at all. So why hand a teenager this job at all? Because German infantry doctrine, more than any other armies on either side, was built around the machine gun as the center of the squad. Riflemen weren't the main weapon supporting the gun was the main weapon, and everyone else existed to protect it, feed it, and let it do the killing. That doctrine is exactly why the position was so lethal to hold. You weren't a soldier with a weapon, you were the weapon, wrapped in a soldier, and the enemy treated you accordingly. Consider what a single gun position could actually do to an assault. Depending on terrain, a well-sighted MG-42 on its heavy Lafette tripod, a 45-pound mount with a built-in telescopic sight, could engage effectively out to nearly 2,200 yards, more than a mile. On the more common bipod, effective range still ran close to 1,100 yards. A Soviet rifle company advancing across open steppe into that field of fire at that rate of cycling could take losses in the dozens inside a single minute. Military historians studying comparative lethality have estimated a machine gun of this type could inflict something like 15 times the casualties of a lone rifleman doing the same job. That number is why the gunners died first. The enemy did the same math the gunners did, just from the other direction. There was also the question of who replaced you. German infantry divisions on the Eastern Front burned through machine gunners at a rate that outpaced almost every other role in the squad, which meant the number 2 man, the loader, was always training to become the number 1 man, whether he wanted the promotion or not. It was an open secret in most units. Watch the gunner closely, not because you were waiting for your turn, but because you knew it was coming regardless. Some loaders described a strange, guilty relief the first time they were finally handed the gun themselves, because at least the waiting was over. Others described the opposite, a numbness that set in after the second or third gunner they'd fed ammunition to went down, until the position started to feel less like a job and more like a rotation nobody escaped. And it wasn't only enemy fire that killed them. Barrels failed, bolts shattered from metal fatigue after tens of thousands of rounds. A gun jammed at the wrong second in the middle of a Soviet assault didn't just fail to fire. It turned 3 men with no working weapon into 3 men standing in the open in front of an advancing line. Reports from the front described gunners abandoning a seized weapon and fighting the rest of the engagement with pistols and grenades because there was no time to strip and clear the action while men were closing the distance. Snipers made the job worse in a different way, a slower, more personal way. Soviet marksmen were trained specifically to hunt machine gun crews, and they were patient about it in a way artillery observers weren't. A sniper might watch a position for 2 full days before taking a single shot, waiting for the gunner to shift his firing angle at the exact moment his head crossed a gap in the parapet. Crews learned to fire from behind sandbagged loopholes, to change positions after every extended engagement, to never let the same man look over the same lip of the trench twice in a row. Some units even mounted a periscope sight on the tripod, specifically so the gunner could aim without exposing more than the barrel itself. None of it made the threat disappear. It just turned survival into a discipline you practiced every single hour, because the 1 hour you forgot was the one that got you. By 1944, the war those gunners were fighting had changed shape entirely. It was no longer about holding ground. It was about buying seconds. German units on the Eastern Front increasingly fought what amounted to a rolling rearguard action. Set the gun up, inflict maximum casualties on the advancing line for as long as the position held, then fall back to the next ridge or tree line and do it again before the Soviets could close in. Some of those units, worn down to a fraction of their original strength, fought that pattern for hundreds of miles, all the way back toward Germany. Some eventually choosing to fight westward through Soviet lines, specifically to surrender to American or British forces instead, because everyone on that front understood which side offered a better chance of walking home. Some crews became legends inside their own divisions for how long they lasted, And those stories tell you almost everything about how thin the odds really were. A gun team credited with holding a single crossroads for 6 hours against repeated assaults, buying an entire battalion time to withdraw across a river before the bridge went down, might be written up for a decoration. But read those accounts closely and the pattern repeats. The original gunner is dead or evacuated by hour 3, the loader who takes over is wounded by hour 5, and whoever is still alive and still firing by hour 6 is often the 4th or 5th man to have touched that trigger since dawn. The gun survives, the position holds, the men behind it are consumed, one after another, like fuel. This is the part almost nobody who wasn't there ever really grasps. The MG-42 wasn't only a weapon the Germans feared losing, it was a weapon that changed the man behind it. Surviving veterans who manned one rarely talked about the mechanics, the rate of fire, the drills. What stayed with them was the sound their own gun made, and what that sound meant they had just done to the men on the other end of it. More than 400,000 of these guns were built during the war. Modified descendants of the design are, remarkably, still in service with militaries today, more than 80 years after that Austrian conscript first picked one up on the Eastern Front. The engineering outlived every empire that built it, and every soldier who carried it. Not every crew died in place, and not every retreat was orderly. Divisional records from the withdrawals of 1943 and 1944 describe rearguard gun teams left behind almost as a matter of policy, the last men out of a village or a river crossing, tasked with buying the rest of the column 20 minutes before the position was expected to fall. Some of those men made it out on foot, hours behind their own retreating unit, using the terrain and the coming darkness to slip past the same troops they had just been firing on. Others didn't. The line between those two outcomes was rarely skill. It was mostly luck, timing, and whichever direction the next barrage happened to land. What almost never survives, in the letters home, in the post-war interviews, in the quiet admissions decades later, is any sense of pride. What survives instead is exhaustion. Men describing counting rounds instead of counting days. Men describing a barrel change as the only thing standing between them and being overrun, over and over, on a front that stretched 1,000 miles and never seemed to end. The job that made you the most important man in your squad also made you the man everyone on the other side of the field was trying hardest to kill, every single day, for as long as you held that position. That's the whole trade nobody explained to a 19-year-old before they put the weapon in his hands. You get the loudest gun on the battlefield and the deadliest. In exchange, you get told explicitly that you are the priority target the instant the shooting starts. Some gunners lasted days. A rare few, like Allerberger, found a way out before the front's arithmetic caught up with them. Most simply became part of the casualty count that made this the deadliest job in the German infantry. A job that existed because someone had to hold that ridge for just long enough, on a front where long enough was rarely more than an afternoon. Was it worth it? Holding one more ridge, buying one more hour, for a war that both sides could increasingly tell was already lost? Every man who fed that belt or squeezed that trigger had to answer that question for himself, usually while the ground in front of him was still moving. Most never got to answer it out loud. If you want to understand how weapons like this one shaped the entire character of infantry warfare on that front, the next video breaks down exactly how the Soviet army learned, at brutal cost, to beat it.